All right, well, welcome back to Mixed Media. If you are tuning in for the first time, welcome to our podcast. On this episode, we've already heard Irving Nestor talk about leadership as a director. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a classical, not a media composer, a classical composer, Maurice Ravel, and some interesting things about him. So
exciting.
Yeah. So Maurice Revel's a French composer. He was born in 1875, died in 1937. You know, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And I would say, you know, he's kind of a lesser known composer, and he's not like, you know, if I were to mention a name like Frederick Delius, who's kind of his contemporary and very similar in style, like Delius is truly a kind of almost unknown composer to, you know, even a lot of people who are serious about classical music. Ravel is, you know, kind of a mid-tier name. He's most known for his piece Bolero, which you probably recognize. It's got this one theme that just kind of repeats for about 18 minutes, and it just gets louder, and he goes through a bunch of different instruments and then different combinations of instruments playing the same melody and getting louder over 18 minutes. So that's his most famous piece. But I want to talk a little bit more about what's kind of some unique stuff about his music, in case you're not terribly familiar with him or not familiar with him at all. And for people who, you know, like listening to this for film music reasons, get into some reasons why I think he's a cool composer to study if you aren't already doing that. So Ravel, of the French Impressionist composers, he's kind of the second biggest name. You're mostly going to hear, even, you know, in every college, you know, or conservatory music history class, you're gonna study Debussy, not Ravel. Those are the two big French Impressionist composers, and Impressionism spreads out to England too, partially through a lot of I'd say Ravel more than Debussy, and Ravel's influence. So
it's
yeah,
actually the first thing I saw when I looked him up was his Impressionism influence is like the second search term or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of important. So what is impressionism in music? And it's a little bit hard to define, but people like Ravel and Debussy and Delius and, you know, the British Impressionists. Delius is one of the British Impressionists. They're really inspired by the stuff that's going on in painting at the same time. So, you know, they're looking at Monet and Degas, and they're kind of coming up with a musical version of that in a way that you know, again, it's kind of hard to describe, but they're kind of generally going for, I'd say, what defines it. And this may not be like what the textbook definition is, if you pull out like a music history textbook, but I would say overall they're generally taking like smaller pieces and trying to focus on like little images of something, give you kind of descriptive titles, and they try to do something that's kind of really, well, generally they're all really colorful, which, you know we've talked a lot about color and orchestration, and they are kind of not giving like a really clear, it kind of stands in contrast to like the big heavy Germanic tradition of music like Wagner. So they're gonna generally have melodies, but they're gonna be doing a lot of things that are more for color and effect than for just pure, like, you know, like how do you want to describe this, like really clear lines and stuff. So we get lots of like blurry runs and things, or odd combinations of instruments, and a lot of non-functional harmony. So instead of like functional traditional tonal harmony where we have like one chord leads to the next, it leads to the next. We got a lot of things like planing where we have like a chord and then the same chord but just like a half step higher and then another half step higher, and it's just because we want to dwell on that like sound of that chord, things like that. Just in general, use of like exotic scales, like whole tone scales. That's something that really comes about, music in general through the through the Impressionists. Although we don't want to like ignore music history like most people do. A lot of really cool effects like that and other orchestration effects, which kind of get attributed to other composers, are actually first occur in the Russian world. Like the first real whole tone scale use, prominent whole tone scale use, was actually like 7 years before these people, like Ravel, in Ruslan and Ludmila, the opera by Glinka, but that tends to get ignored anyway. But a lot of these things are popularized by people like Ravel and Debussy. And that's generally what Impressionism is. It's kind of giving a kind of colorful but indistinct picture of something. Of course, it can be like done on a larger scale, like some of Ravel's pieces, but mostly that's what these pieces are. They're short 4 or 5 minute things that have descriptive titles. And Ravel does a lot of that, like Debussy. Things like a boat tossed on the waves, or the swaying of a decaying body that was still hanging from where it was like where the person had been hanged. Like pictures like that, and setting them to music. So some things that I think are really distinctive about his music, and you could point to maybe some of these things in Debussy too, but I generally just, and maybe I'm gonna take some heat from people, and you're welcome to criticize me in the comments or anywhere. But honestly, I like Ravel much more than Debussy. If anything, Ravel is probably my favorite in the classical, the strictly classical world. He's probably my favorite non-Russian composer. Okay, so what's distinct about Ravel's music? And some of it's a contrast to Debussy, but a lot of it's just things that Debussy does too, but I think Ravel does better. Ravel is one of the best orchestrators of all time. And it's not just like in his, understanding of orchestral color, which is fantastic. And if you want to understand what orchestral color is, just like put on Ravel, and you'll get it. And like compare that to, I don't know, something like, I'm not saying that Wagner is a bad orchestrator, but just if you listen to that, you can if you listen to like something by Wagner and listen to something by Ravel right after each other, I think you'll get an idea of what I mean by like color, what musicians tend to mean when they say color, if you're not familiar with that term. But he's also so interesting because he not only wrote a lot for piano, and then he orchestrated his own works, and also pretty famously the Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. Russian piano piece that he orchestrated and quite famously. So not only can you just study his orchestration straight up, but you can study the pieces that he orchestrated, whether they're his own or other people's. Take things that are not for orchestra and then see how he gave them to the orchestra. And that gives you a really interesting window into how he thinks. Because, if you just try and study orchestration, you don't see like the background to it, like in just a gigantic orchestral piece. You can guess why certain decisions were made, but it's much easier to see like, well, why did he could have had other options if he if you're looking at the piano score and you see like what his thought process is. So he has a lot of his orchestrations of piano pieces, which are just fantastic to learn from. Another reason why I really like him so much is that kind of in contrast to a lot of other composers, his melodies are really like, he has really, really pretty melodies, but they're not heavy-handed melodies. They're not the kind of thing that someone's going to, an opera singer is going to like belt out, and it's going to sound like somebody's, some like massively emotional thing. Like they're really beautiful, and that goes for his textures too. In general, they're just really light textures, so it's pretty, but it doesn't feel massive. You're not like hit by a wall of brass. A lot of woodwinds and strings, and I think in some ways that's maybe his biggest legacy, which I'll talk about in a minute. But like in general, it's never overbearing. I never get exhausted while I listen to it. Whereas like Mahler, is a great composer, or Wagner, a great composer, but for me at least, after a while, my ears get tired of hearing like these walls of brass. And he's really a great example of how to make what you write for every instrument be totally natural. It might be really difficult to do, and sometimes in the his piano stuff, he would write things that are technically not playable, but he would include them anyway as like a kind of indication of what he like the general style he wanted, and like what you should aspire to, even if you can't physically do it. But in general, everything is really natural, and even on things that are not his instrument at all, they work really well. And also, I think his flute solo, which is actually a gigantic flute section solo, towards the end of his ballet Daphnis at Chloe. I think it's the best flute solo outside of the Russian world. I love playing it, so maybe that's my personal bias.
I was going to say, how does one acquire that skill of writing well for instruments that you personally don't know? So, is it reading, observing? How does that work?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. So, you got to study those instruments, and study examples of things that are written for them. You also want to talk to players who play those things, and they're honestly the best source. And then I think it's also really helpful if you just try playing the instrument yourself. I mean, even just pick it up and see what it's like to hold a trumpet, and like what happens and what sort of things, even to someone who is not an expert on it, seem like awkward on it. Some other things about him, things that I think are important to note if you're gonna spend some time studying him, and I think they are relevant to media composers, if that's why you're listening to this. He was really great at incorporating a whole bunch of different styles into his music. So they all are generally under the blanket of Impressionism, and all of these things are distinctively in his own voice. There are lots of, he's got incorporating Baroque style, Rococo style, which is a really kind of specialized thing. And he's even got he studied jazz, and George Gershwin went over to France and tried to study with him, and he basically said, I'm not going to teach you because I'd rather have have Gershwin exist in the world than Gershwin try and sound like a bad Ravel. But he's certainly aware of jazz, and he incorporates that. He also was a very good teacher. Not that he taught a lot of people. He was Vaughan Williams' teacher, and I've mentioned Vaughan Williams a few times on the show. So influence there. So he's a really, if you're going to study his music and listen to it, he's a really good example of how to incorporate a bunch of different styles while still retaining your own voice. So I would listen to that. And it's also really interesting to note how he responds really directly to the events of the world around him, which is not something that every composer did overtly. He was very, did a lot of commentary, musical commentary on especially the Second World War, the lead up to it. And then he actually served as like a truck driver for the French military during the war, and then writing pieces for all of his friends who died during the war. So, social commentary that way, without like not like heavy-handed political commentary, but musical commentary on what was happening in the world around him. So it's something else you can pay attention to in his music. So I'm just going to list some pieces in case you're not familiar with him. Some really great things I'd recommend listening to, and maybe we can throw some links in when we get this up later. So obviously I mentioned Bolero, which is his most famous piece. But I really cannot recommend highly enough his longest piece, the ballet Daphnis at Chloe, which was written for the Ballet Russe, actually. And I think it was kind of the biggest piece of the year before the Rite of Spring. It's kind of an interesting contrast if you listen to that and then listen to the Rite of Spring. It shows you where music was in 1912 and 1913. But Daphnis and Chloe, like I said, best non-Russian flute solo, just one of my overall favorite pieces, and really great pieces. Just listen to be absorbed in its colors. His string quartet is also a really great piece if you want to study natural writing for strings. And then a lot of his piano stuff, most of which he orchestrated, things like Les Tambours de Couperin, Mirars, Gaspard de la Noite, and then his orchestral piece La Valse, which is kind of about the end of the kind of end of French culture in the face of and also Germanic culture in the face of World War One. Those are all really cool pieces to listen to, and I highly recommend. And then just a few other things about why I think he's relevant to media composers. Again, if that's why you're here, he's got a really strong sense of musical drama. Even though he's, like I said, a lot of his pieces are kind of small pictures, capturing like non-moving things. He has a really great way of coloring these things and doing it really lightly without being heavy-handed. And I think in some ways that's kind of he's sort of a forerunner of a lot of more, not necessarily totally atmospheric, because he's not atmospheric. He's got atmosphere but also melody, but he's kind of a forerunner in that sense of more atmospheric music that still has that sense of drama. So I think that's another reason, that's a good reason to study him. I honestly think that, I know a couple of shows ago I mentioned it, Max Steiner said that, if Wagner were alive, Wagner would be the greatest film composer.
I remember.
But yeah, but I disagree. I think maybe that might have been true in like 1930, but I think in 2021, if any classical composer should come back from the grave and be a great film composer, I think Ravel would probably be the winner, just because of that sense of drama, and also just like having really beautiful melodies that are so light they kind of can float through scenes and be really colorful. Is also a really big influence on Desplat, who's obviously a French composer. So I have to imagine that Desplat is listened to Ravel extensively. There are like overt echoes, I think, of Ravel, like Ravel's piano concerto, I think is a huge influence on Desplat's score for Little Women from, I think, 2019. I think that's pretty much, there's no way that it's not an influence, but just in general, in all of Desplat's music. And Desplat has that same sense of like kind of happy, lyricism, and these really light textures that are just kind of almost impressionistically painting scenes. And obviously he had a huge influence on Vaughan Williams, who has had a lot of influence on composers, including John Williams. And honestly, I think I can't say this is like a direct influence on John Williams, but I think if you want to look at some things that are sort of, they could have been influences if they were not influences on Williams' lighter fantasy music, things like Hook and the first two Harry Potter films. To me, those are very Revelian overall, and just, you know, kind of light, not really like, not brass dominated like Star Wars, but, you know, kind of nice floating melodies and kind of lighter orchestral colors. So, you know, he has, even if those aren't like overt influences on Williams, I think that you can get some of what Williams was doing if you listen to Ravel's music. So I think there's a lot of reasons why he would have been a great film composer, and why his music is really great stuff to study if you are a film composer and you are not studying them, and also not already studying him. And also, just, I don't know, personally, I think he's a great composer to just listen to.
He's I've noticed also, you know, looking at the analytics around his name, I noticed that he comes up a lot alongside writing for strings in particular. So I don't know, I guess it's like a high demand topic, writing for strings in general, apparently. So
yeah. Well, I would say that if you're not a string player, which the vast majority of composers are not, and if you're going to try and do something orchestral, you know, that's probably the hardest thing to do, because strings are so fundamental to the orchestra, and they are very different than piano, and, you know, require a very different kind of thinking than woodwinds. And I mean, I admit that writing for strings is definitely my weakness. So yeah, like I said, Ravel's String Quartet is a great piece to look at.
Cool.
Yeah, that's basically what I've got on Ravel.
Yeah, so that's our good old friend Maurice. That's really cool, though. I guess we'll end it there. Oh yeah, news. I'll go first. This is not so much news as a big fat I told you so. Go back to my episode on inflation. Go rewatch it. Absorb the information. Not financial advice, but absorb the information. I said the odds that everything that they're saying is right about short-term inflation is probably wrong, and I was right. I just got to say that. And I don't know. Maybe I should do a little bit more of that sort of like entrepreneurs sort of outlook on the future sort of things, ways to protect yourself and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, I don't know. I'm hearing that it's still temporary, even though like months ago they were like, oh, in 2 months you'll see it in the data. I mean, it's like 5 months later, and it's still the same way it was, at much higher levels than I predicted it probably would be in that video. So I recommend that you protect yourself, and that you don't just, you know, people have different motivations for what they do, which also means like the Fed has its own motivations for what it does. So don't just make your financial decisions based off of one data point, is all I'll say. If you've been in the stock market, you've been doing probably pretty well. And that was a major asset class I said to invest in to avoid inflation, because stocks get adjusted up with inflation. Ironically, riskier assets go up with inflation because their growth potential. And crypto's been doing pretty well too. So I just got to put that out there. Anything in the music world?
You know, I haven't kept up with too much this week with the move, but I did notice, not music related, but I know it's kind of still technically an unconfirmed rumor, but it sounds like Disney is going to be renewing Kathleen Kennedy's contract as president of Lucasfilm. That's been the news all over the place for the last few years as technically unconfirmed rumor, but it's probably not the kind of thing that once it's leaked, Disney is going to go back and say, oops, we're not going to do that. So,
bruh, I don't know how I missed that, but that's insane. That okay, well, my outlook on the film world has gone further downwards.
I mean, so I think her contract expires at the in another few days, like sometime at the beginning of September, maybe September 15th. So
everyone I knew was anticipating that she was not going to get renewed.
I know,
I
but
want
it
to.
seems they definitely can't. Like, even if they weren't planning to do it, even if they weren't planning on renewing it, there's no way that after that gets leaked, they're gonna like go back on it. And they're gonna look bad in the media that oh, they gave into fan backlash or something like that. So
those conniving. Oh, I have so many names for Disney.
Yes. So who knows how much longer? But it sounds like we're probably going to have Kathleen Kennedy continuing to head Lucasfilm.
We've got to suffer through this longer. Well, in the face of that, I say pray for films, and also I don't know, just keep saying that you're mad at Disney. Say I'm mad, I'm mad, I'm mad, I'm mad, I'm mad, and I don't know. Maybe they'll listen. I don't know, but that is bad news for sure. At least if they went the corporatist route, they would stop offending people, even though they would still be terrible films. Like the pure, like, just Marvel minus weird stuff. Maybe they would get like a few more people to watch, but I think really what they need is a complete change in direction. It looks like they're not doing that. So, wow. Well, that's fun.
I can only hope that doesn't end up being true, but
yeah. Well, okay. I want to say something more positive. So, or at least just stop thinking about that possibility that I thought was not a possibility. Yeah, so we want to go live on Rumble, but it costs money. It costs money to go live on Rumble right now. It's not going to cost money forever, so it's not the end of the world. It's a new technology for them. But I would love to get there live before anyone else is on there. You know what's really cool? If you search podcast on Rumble, like half of the search results are us. I just got to say that.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. If you search like Scarlett Johansson, we've done like 3 videos that pertain to Black Widow in some way or another, and 2 of them come up on the first page. I gotta say, for those of you on Rumble who are pushing those views up and clicking that Rumble button and pushing us up in the rankings, I love you so much. But one favor I've got to ask for you, if we can get just one person to click on that locals link and become a member, I will absorb the rest of the cost of the membership that allows us to go live. I just want one backer, one person who will sponsor, and you will get a shout out. You'll get a lot of love, and maybe I'll. I can't. We don't have mixed media merch, but maybe I can send you a free Ariella hat or something like that. From me personally. But I would love you forever if for $5 a month you can go to locals and you can help us to get live on Rumble before everyone else gets it for free, and that way we can be the premier podcast, as we almost are on that platform. So I would really love that. And also, like, I just want to hear you guys. I don't think we've got anyone on Rumble on our Discord, even though, you guys seem to be loving the content on there. Our subscriber numbers, they keep ticking up as we release podcast episodes. So join us on Discord. We're friends. We talk about stuff all the time. I'm trying to talk about stuff more. I'm in the middle of post-production on a film, so I'm like a little overworked over here. And then, here's another piece of good news. Almost forgot. I alluded many weeks ago. It might have been, or maybe it's less than that. It was maybe 5 weeks ago or something like that. I alluded to the fact that I might be doing something cool with another podcast network. I've gotten a positive word from the CEO, and that also means that I'm going to be working on another podcast, not a host, of course, but doing marketing stuff for it. And I don't know, maybe there's a possibility of a cool a cool thing happening there. We'll see. I can't promise it at all. I haven't even talked to him about that, but I think it could be cool. It could be fun. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that good news out there. So with that, I think that's pretty much it. Have a good week, and if there's any link that you want, they're all in the description, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.